Gabe, look, if you look at the history of winners, past winners of Iowa, if they have been powered by evangelical voters in Iowa, they have hit a wall in New Hampshire. It is not nearly as socially conservative as Iowa. Is DeSantis finding a crowd that's ready to rally with him, or is this going to be a tougher sell for him?
Well, Chuck, it will be a very tough sell. As you laid out, the math is very difficult, but his campaign does see an opening. They think that, roughly a third, about 35% of the GOP primary electorate will go for former President Trump. 20% is never Trump. They think these more moderate candidates, establishment candidates, will split that vote and essentially cancel each other out. And then they see potentially the other 45% being the sweet spot for Governor DeSantis. The question is, will that actually happen? A couple interesting things I saw today, Chuck. I was able to get a question into Governor DeSantis in one of his events earlier today. He did seem more engaged with voters, at least at this event, taking questions from them along the rope line, and his team did allow reporters to film that. I asked him several questions, and as you know, Chuck, sometimes it's very telling what a candidate chooses to engage on and what he doesn't. In this case, he did not engage on any questions regarding the classified documents and investigation involving former President Trump. He did engage and fired back a response when I asked him about this idea. Earlier in the day, former President Trump had said that he could fix the U.S. in 6 months, and this comes after Governor DeSantis earlier in the week in his stump speech said that it'd take him 2 terms to turn around the country, undoing the damage of Democrats. I asked Governor DeSantis what he made of former President Trump's response that he'd do this in 6 months. And DeSantis immediately fired back. He said, why didn't he do it in 4 years? So he was clearly wanting to establish that contrast with former President Trump. I want to get to some of the voters I spoke with really quickly in Iowa yesterday. We were in Iowa yesterday, in New Hampshire today. Take a listen to what they had to say as this field started to get even bigger. Take a listen. Did you support former President Trump?
Absolutely.
You did. So this time around, do you think, are you leaning more towards Governor DeSantis or former President Trump?
We'll see how things play out. I love Trump's policies. I struggle with his personality.
Just today, though, we heard that Chris Christie and Mike Pence are getting in next week. What do you make of this crowded GOP field?
I'm only going to work on these two.
So, yeah, Chuck, big question there. Will he gained momentum. If he does well in Iowa, does this translate into New Hampshire? Well, we still got 7 months to figure it out. He's going to South Carolina tomorrow, Governor DeSantis is. Chuck.
Gabe, does the campaign acknowledge that this growing field is a bit of a reflection on his rough start?
Again, as you know, Chuck, they will try to spin it, and they keep saying, well, it wasn't as rough of a start as everybody's making it out to be. It just shows that there's interest. But certainly, there was a divide internally in the campaign whether the Twitter route was the way to go. Look, they see it as they have an incredible amount of money to play with here in the next coming months. And they just think that if they can build a momentum and build something in these early primary states because they do have enough money to throw at this problem, now that he's a formal candidate, now that in their view he can go after former President Trump, although, again, he doesn't do it in the stump, he waits till reporters ask him questions, they think over the next coming months the tide will turn. But as Chris Christie has said, look, in 2016, the GOP candidates thought that, they were waiting to take Trump on one-on-one, and it didn't work out then. Some of DeSantis' critics say it's happening all over again, Chuck.
Yeah, no, it is, some of us went through this a few times. Looks awfully familiar. Gabe Gutierrez on the ground in New Hampshire. Let's move over to Iowa, where we find Vaughn Hillyard. And let's say what the huge story is. Donald Trump spent the night in Iowa. Donald Trump, Vaughn, spent the night in a state where he owns no hotel. He did not sleep in a bed that he technically owns. I know we're all sort of laughing about this, but this is only the second time he's ever spent the night in Iowa as a presidential candidate.
Right. He's now matched what he did in 2015, 2016. Now he's got 18 months to double that. It's notable because Ron DeSantis, by comparison, made stops in 6 different Iowa towns over the 48 hours he was here. Usually Donald Trump flies in to a city every couple weeks, holds his mega rally, and then he flies back home to either Florida or Bedminster. And that was notable that he flew in yesterday and is going to be taking off tonight. But, you know, the interesting part here with Chuck is when you're talking about Donald Trump and a lot of the criticism towards Ron DeSantis, is he willing to answer questions? Well, we went around to 3 different stops of Donald Trump today, and it was suggested to us that he was going to talk to reporters at some point. And at each stop, we were ultimately denied. He is now heading to his 4th stop, we should note, which is a town hall with Sean Hannity that is set to air tonight. Of course, usually the questions that come from that particular moderator are not usually reflective of the greater media's questioning. So it's notable that Donald Trump continues to steer clear of, straightforward questions, especially at the heart of the special counsel's investigation as it unfolds.
So, how would you say he did in Iowa today? I mean, is he, he doesn't do it traditionally. He doesn't do the things that every other person that's an expert about Iowa caucus politics would tell you should do. He's like a speech and then he sort of walks away. What have you seen? Has he done anything different than his usual shtick?
Well, the difference was instead of one big mega rally, he did 3 small stops. He stopped and met with faith leaders. He stopped a West Side Conservative Club, a group just west of Des Moines, that is made up of more of your kind of suburban Republican types. I was talking to one particular couple who, came to see him. They caucused for him this go around. They said they're sticking by him another time. I talked to somebody else who caucused for Jeb Bush 8 years ago, yet came into that room to hear him speak. Then he was here at a community center talking with another small group of folks. And so it's different. And they're going to try to make the case that they are doing retail politicking and that Donald Trump is taking Iowa seriously. And, when we're talking about the kind of twofold parallel tracks of the political one and the investigative one here, Chuck, I want to let you hear a little bit of him addressing that conservative group outside of Des Moines today, because he didn't talk about the classified documents specifically, but he talked about the Department of Justice and the attack that he says that he has endured over the years. Take a listen.
This is years and years of entrenchment, years and years of radicalism. It's really radicalism, and it's putting our country at great danger. I mean, I'm fighting them all the time, and I think one of the reasons I'm doing so, because I've really fought them successfully, and we were making tremendous problems. But this is numerous presidents, long-term. People are embedded in those positions, and they hate us. They hate our values. They hate what we stand for.
I was talking, Chuck, to one close ally of Trump's down in Florida here, who told me that Trump will continue to hammer home on this because of Ron DeSantis is a big part of this. Essentially, Ron DeSantis over the next 8 months is going to have to make a decision. Does he echo what Donald Trump just told this Iowa crowd, in that there is this deep state that exists that is coming to attack the MAGA movement? Or does he throw Donald Trump under the bus, somebody who is still a popular figure by and large within this Republican Party? These next 8 months are going to be so much about the politics of it and policy, but also the investigations that find Donald Trump that he finds himself in the heart of.
That's the $1 million question. How do the legal developments impact this race? That's what we're all waiting to find out. Vaughn Hillyard on the ground with the Trump campaign. Vaughn, thank you. Let me bring in the Des Moines Register's chief political reporter, Brianne Pfannenstiel. So, Brianne, the last 3 Iowa Republican caucus goer winners all came arguably from the evangelical wing of the party: Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee. None of them became the nominee. It is clear that this is the DeSantis strategy. So let's start there. Is the evangelical vote there to be taken away from Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This is a group of caucus goers who show up in disproportionate numbers. They caucus pretty, you can count on them to show up, so to speak. And so this is a group that Ron DeSantis is really going to be trying to reach out to. They've been supporters of Donald Trump in the past, and it's maybe not an obvious pairing, but it's one that he's delivered for them. That he certainly comes to the state and will argue that he's the person who paved the way for Roe versus Wade to be overturned. And that is a huge issue for Iowa evangelicals. And so he's coming into the state now, and we're seeing an interesting back and forth over the abortion issue today. Ron DeSantis, of course, signed a 6-week abortion ban in Florida. Donald Trump said that was maybe too harsh. And so at this event this morning at the Westside Conservatives Club, the Never Back Down PAC, which is supporting Ron DeSantis, had its bus parked outside and was putting flyers on cars, kind of critiquing Donald Trump's stance on abortion and saying that he's not strong enough on these pro-life issues. So that's a really clear indication that Ron DeSantis plans to go after Donald Trump from the right in a direct effort to get these evangelical caucus goers on his side.
So I was talking with Dave Kochel on my podcast. By the way, he had great things to say about your reporting, for what it's worth. And he made a note. He said that Trump's strength really comes from this is going to be an odd way to say it, but the coasts of Iowa, the river towns, whether it's Council Bluffs in the west or Dubuque and northeast Iowa, all along the Mississippi there. Besides those areas, where else does Trump have strength?
I mean, I think we're going to be seeing him compete in the major population centers. He has a huge advantage coming into this race in that he has a massive stockpile of data of people who have been supporters of him before. He has their phone numbers, he has their email addresses, and they're going to be reaching out to them as much as possible. And so in terms of trying to get people into his events, committing to caucus for him, I think you're really going to see him go to these major population centers to win over these people and cement their support going into the caucuses. And that's an advantage, but it also leaves an opening for someone like Ron DeSantis, for someone like Tim Scott, to come in and go into these smaller communities, to go into places where it's tough for Donald Trump to show up. He has a massive amount of security detail that can make it difficult to do these smaller events that we're seeing. So it creates an opening and it's an advantage.
All right, let me talk about Mike Pence and Tim Scott, the other two that I think could have some traction in Iowa. Pence is in some ways the more principled, potentially social conservative here. Is he viewed that way among some leaders in the social conservative movement there in Iowa?
The Republicans who I'm talking to about Mike Pence, who is set to launch his campaign with a Des Moines rally next week, you know, they like Mike Pence. They respect Mike Pence. They view him as being a very principled conservative. They think he's doing this for the right reasons. But there's always a but after that. They just don't know that he's exciting enough. They don't know that he's going to be able to bring new people in. They're really struggling to kind of see the lane for him going forward. So every time you talk to people about Mike Pence, they like him, but.
Interesting. That's a good way of putting it. I'm going to go away from that a lot, Brianne. I like him, but. Tim Scott, he strikes me as the West Des Moines candidate. Am I overstating it?
Yeah, I think, you know, you could draw parallels to maybe Marco Rubio, who spent a lot of time in the suburban Des Moines areas trying to get kind of that moderate suburban, you know, maybe Chamber of Commerce style Republican. But we're also seeing him spend a lot of time in Northwest Iowa, where there is a big base of those evangelical caucus goers that we're talking about, those very conservative folks who are also very religious. So they're on the far right of the spectrum, but they're, you know, rooted in their faith, which is something that Tim Scott talks a lot about. And they see him as being a very authentic messenger for that issue. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he spends time in central Iowa or whether he's really courting kind of that Northwest Iowa caucus goer.
Brianne, Pfannenstiel from the Des Moines Register. I have a feeling we're going to see you a lot, and we'll get much better at pronouncing your last name. Brianne, thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.